you've written a book, right?
I have written a book. Yeah,
Okay, I've read your book.
you have.
I have, yes, I have. And I recommended it to my little cousin who is actually graduating Ivy this year. I think it was something that was, it's kind of funny. You read it, I'm 30, so for context, if I read it at 22 or 23, I still don't think I would have taken it in as well as 30. But it's like, I was like, you need to read this message and try to extract what you can out of it. Because especially at Ivy, I found that they put you in a bubble very much so, right? And so when I read your book, I was like, yeah, okay, Ivy prof, seeing all the Ivy students following their friends, following whatever's marketed to them the most effectively. And I've been really trying to get in my cousin's head a lot about, hey, there's a lot out there beyond the bubble. And I recommended your book to him.
I that is about the biggest compliment, particularly as an opener role, that you could have possibly given me. Wow, I
That wasn't paid. That wasn't paid either. So
yeah, no, and we are recorded, so just so everybody knows that. Wow, I thank you. That's any author loves hearing something, but it's not just that somebody read it, but that they found value in it and even handed it to someone else, right? This is part of the reason. I mean, Will, I'm in my mid 40s. I'm very much not the demographic to be trying social media, to be honest, right? And at least in terms of technological prowess and trying to beat the algorithm, so to speak. But the reason why I wanted to do this was, I wrote the book, and obviously, if you ever write a book, well, it's got to be something that you feel really strongly about, because writing a book is an extremely painful thing. I even say this as a professor who writes academic papers, right? But you've really got to believe in it. And then what you'll discover is the moment that you publish it, unless you're someone who's already famous, um, nobody reads it, right? Like by and large, nobody knows you've even done
you
it.
need
So then,
marketing, you need a team behind it. Yeah.
yeah. So I remember there's this old saying, in the author community that, most of the work is the day after you publish, starts the day after that you publish a book, right? Which
Yeah.
I'm realizing now. And I've been trying to think of ways to do it without social media. There really isn't, great substitutes for that these days. So hence, kind of wanting to start this partly because I'm stunned by this. There doesn't seem to be a lot of content out there where, for example, a prof talking to his or her former students about a lot of these issues, or even forget about prof, just having these conversations and really kind of trying to ask hard questions about whether in school we do a good job of helping prepare people for the real world in the real sense, right? Not just get that first job. And you've read the book, so you know what I think about that. I don't think we do a good job of this. And I continue to be surprised that I have yet to sit in a faculty meeting where people have even brought this up as an issue. So it's not like there's even, a faction among faculty in a business school that believe this is very, very important and they're just losing. It doesn't even come up, right? So that's how big the blind spot is. I'm very glad to hear that there are efforts being made, if not just at the individual level, to try to get people to open up. I agree with you at 22. Certainly, if I think back to me at 22, I don't think I would have taken to heart most of what was in my own book, right? That I've got,
Yeah.
right?
That's the
Yeah,
problem. Yeah.
that is the problem. I do think that that's a burden on us as profs and people who are in education to do that better, frankly, because I do think that there is a responsibility on our side, especially being older, knowing what we know to do better than what we do. There's an incentive problem there, though, because if we don't, it turns out actually the system kind of still works for now, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's it's certainly not the best way to do it. Well, Brandon told me you're an Ivy graduate yourself, is that right?
Yeah. I'm a C guy, 2019.
Okay. I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your path and your story. You said you're 30. And just for the sake of the recording and for our viewers, we've never spoken before. So this is literally our first. We didn't
No,
even do the warm up, actually. We're
no.
just.
Or
So
riffing.
yep. And as much as I'd love to say, I do tons of homework, for every guest that I have. That's usually because they're a former student. I don't have to do the homework. But, well,
Mhm.
you're not a former student of mine. So literally, you're a blank slate for me. And I'd love to hear your story, just to the extent that you're willing to share it.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's always good just to meet smart people like you and be able to tell whatever story I have to tell, and hopefully it helps a couple people in some sense of the word. So my background, going way back in the sense of kind of school days, is that I was an engineer first. I did electrical engineering at Western. Was part of a couple student government things, did some track and field, kind of that kind of stuff. And then after that, went in and started working in industry for a while, was working as an engineer, was working in a place that I didn't think was the right fit for me. So I just didn't feel like the right path per se. And that in industry, left the job and then did the classic find yourself overseas for a couple of months. And I had a job lined up in Canada that I was going to take, but I also applied to a master's program to get not only what I thought was important to take my engineering side, but also apply it to a business perspective. And in that world, it took me from being kind of like the tech guy that was not as outgoing or whatnot, but then in Ivy world started to realize the value of meeting people, learning different perspectives, opening up beyond just the regular bubble that I was kind of in. And that led me to a bunch of different paths. I ended up actually, and we can talk about this perspective to what you talk about. I ended up not going exactly the traditional path. I unfortunately still did, and I say unfortunately because I do believe this, fell into the consulting bubble, but an unconventional consulting bubble where it was a group that was working with small businesses, which I was very passionate about at the time. I went into that passion that I was in school and trying to understand what it is I actually want to do and work with. And it was a consulting firm that worked with small businesses. And so that got me a bit of the passion that I really wanted to pursue and opened up my world to working with not just these large conglomerates, but how it was to be a mom and pop to run your own business and what it looked like to be someone who was like financially invested into everything that it was to run a small business. And my first job at a school was as a consulting firm for SMBs. So I was in factories, in various different places of work, whether it was a kitchen manufacturing place to an accounting firm and doing like their operations and some of their data work. And I saw again firsthand small business owners what they put into their day-to-day lives to like make a business successful, and that rubbed off a lot on me. Like what it took was a very big influencer for me. And then from that world, went into work in a little bit of a data engineering perspective in another smaller shop. I worked at a healthcare tech company for a while as well to kind of understand Silicon Valley and kind of what that looked like to run a tech company. So I was originally working in a place of small businesses, understood tech, understood what it was to do venture. And then from that perspective, I actually founded this company, Cyder, with my best friend from Ivy, Sukhman, who is just one of the greatest human beings I've ever gotten to know. And that's a whole thing too. Whenever you're founding a company, your partner needs to be your best friend and your best enemy at the same time, and being able to work with them. And then from that, we've worked on Cyder for about 4 years. Fort Cyder is a loyalty platform that works with credit unions. And the thing that was nice with the credit union world is that it operates very much in that passion that I have of the small businesses, the community aspect. That is the thing that I love to work on. And I think that, again, going to your work and what you've done is the passion that I have about making that community and making small businesses great and strong and able to compete with the bigger companies is what drives my passion for working at Cyder, allowing the credit unions and these small businesses to be successful. And since then, we've gone on to raise. We have a team of about 12 now, which is amazing. We're chugging along and growing, and it's been an amazing journey since then. But I'll stop there because I don't usually talk too much about myself, and I'll open up to any things that you want to talk about.
Yeah, sure. No, that's a great, I think, summary of the path. There's multiple things actually that I'm wondering about, but I'll start with the smallest first. Can you describe a little bit more about what your startup does?
Yeah, so Cider to the one line is essentially not one line. There's going to be a little bit of explanation. So for those that aren't familiar with credit unions are essentially small regional banks. They're banks that work in specific geographies or with a specific demographic group. For example, there's a credit union that only operates out of Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. That's their geography that they work with. Now, these credit unions are very, very small. And what they aren't able to do is spin up a lot of the products that traditional banks are able to build in-house because of their scale and size. So when you think of a lot of the big banks like Scotiabank, RBC, TD, they also have loyalty programs that are synonymous with their name. So if you think of TD, Aeroplan, Scotia, Scene, RBC, Avion. What we recognized when we were working in our space is that all these little credit unions don't even have a loyalty program to compete with the big banks. And one of their biggest problems is they have a growth problem, a churn problem, and a share of wallet problem. So they don't have the mechanisms or tools to incentivize what they call members. They don't call them customers because the people that bank with them actually get ownership in the bank. That's just a fun little distinguishing factor. They get shares the more money they put in. So we built a platform that allows for credit unions of all size to spin up some type of offering that automates, hey, if you've opened a checking account, get some points or rewards for that. If you're doing some type of behavior, we incentivize that through exactly what you would do if you were at BMO, you get air miles. It's the same kind of tooling, but it's provided specifically to the credit unions.
I see. So that's what you're providing. And one of the
For
things
sure.
that was very clear when you were talking through the path was, what you got to see, for example, with small business owners really inspiring you. Was that, I'm trying to figure out like how much of that was emergent in the sense that you didn't know exactly what you wanted to do, but you saw that and that was a goalpost that pointed you in a certain direction? Or did you already kind of know what you wanted to do? Because I could also tell the story, given what you've said you've done, that that was all basically training up for this, right? But in an
Unintentional
intentional
training.
way. Not
Yeah.
intentional?
It was, I think what it was is, so I come from a family that has a business, entrepreneurial father, hardworking entrepreneurial mother, and that was always kind of a ingrained perspective to me. But I think it was the passion of somehow, how do I make the small business win? How can I take an engineering degree, a master's degree, and maybe not go to a corporate world, but perspective and more, how do I help these? Because I believe like over a massive part of the Canadian economy is around small business. It's one of the major drivers, right? It's hurting. And so one of those that was always a, okay, how do I do that? And that's why I fell into this like boutique, strangest little group of consultants that was giving back to small businesses. But it was always that I want to be a part of this, a business owner in some perspective. Whether I can, at a younger age, I didn't think I was ready to start my own. So it was kind of like, how can I at a younger age give back to it? That was the driver when I was recruiting and doing all that stuff. It's like, oh, here's a big name like Scotiabank, or you can work here and work in John's flower shop or something like that and try to help there. And I was like, okay, the money's great here, but this is something I really want to do now. So I just took that.
I see. So what I think I'm hearing from you is you actually had a pretty good sense of the what, you just didn't know how,
How?
very
No idea.
early on.
Yeah.
And then the how kind of fell into place. But because you had a sense of the what already, you weren't necessarily making moves that would have very little value for your path, for example. It looks actually like you had really trained well. But tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if you
So,
actually feel
so I
like you
guess
had.
it looks like it, but I think it was like there was a lot of lamenting. There was a lot of, for example, again, I did end up in a bigger shop for a little bit, but it was much more like a stepping stone to be able to exit from my own company. It was like, I need funds for now, I need to get out. But it was very much like, I think when the decisions would come, so let's just say I had 5 offers from a job, it would always go, yeah, this is a whatever $X thousand, but this is the thing, right? So it was like, I'd rather wake up at 6 a.m. to work till 8 p.m. to do this thing than that thing, like, I don't know, like assurance or something, which is great for some people, but I was like, I can't do that. Like, that's not something I want to do. So
Yeah. One of the other things I'm fascinated by when I hear your story, you tell a narrative that, I totally get about small businesses and kind of how important they are. But I'm curious why that tips it for you, because there's plenty of, let's say, your former classmates who that doesn't bother them at all. For example, the plight of small businesses, for example, versus big business, which seems
yeah,
to be an undertone of the narrative. Why does that get to you? Like, why does that
I
resonate with
think
you in a way?
I think the two main data points would be coming from a family business kind of side of things, my family side, and then me personally always wanting to do it myself in some capacity. So I think the line is, and again, all through retrospect, not through at the time, is when I was younger, I couldn't do it myself. I didn't know what to even start on. But I knew that I wanted to do something in that space. So if I couldn't own my own business, let me help a small business. That was kind of my thing. And I guess in the other way is that I was very blessed to just be able to have a supportive family that was kind of like, the money will come. Like I had said, support, the money will come if you followed your path that you love, kind of thing. So if this is what you want to do, then that's what you do. So that's another kind of, there was no input from pressures at home per se, or from letting other inputs from my peers really influence that decision. It was much more of a go this way and just see how it works out for you, because it'll benefit you in some capacity.
Yeah, and I can actually pick up on that, which actually is a big contrast between you and, again, if we do a comparison to many of your classmates, I'll do that as a broad brushstroke comparison, right? We don't need to name names or anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But because so many of them would be influenced by the environment or peers or what they see at
yeah,
Ivy or the
yeah.
messaging, which isn't really that subtle. But it
No,
sounds like you were grounded in an idea from the get-go. Now, some of that sounds like it is from growing up in a family where you saw that,
yeah, yeah.
and sort of bought into those values very easily because they resonated. That seems to have helped you a lot, right? But it's also a story where the other things, even when you encountered them, didn't pull you away, or at least not for very long.
Yeah. No, that's the thing is like when I look at all the decisions, all the jobs I've had before Cyder, and even Cyder now, like the literally the mantra is how do we give back to small businesses and support local community and all that kind of stuff. Um, every job was always this kind of concept of, is the pro and con of an extra, it was always financial at the end of the day. It was like, okay, is this extra amount of money enough to make me want to go off of the path that is feels gut right to me? Or what is this? Again, it was never I need to work in small businesses. It was do I go into data engineering at let's just call it like Capital One or something like that, or do I go into data engineering for a firm that supports manufacturing in Ontario, right? And so you have that kind of offer, and you're kind of like, okay, what's the path that makes me happy, that kind of thing. And it was financial, passion, and then skill set that I kind of would like augment the decision on. And that's how I would make that ultimate decision. I don't know if that's dialing into the question you're answering. It would always go back to that.
Yeah, no, I mean it does to a degree.
Yeah.
I'm asking actually a big question, and in fact, there's sub questions attached to it. That's why it's
Okay,
a little
let me
bit
see if I can
messy.
get there.
Yeah, I think because one of the things I'm wondering, I'll try to tell it like a story. So, Will, you're the young version of you, has a general idea of what he wants to do, doesn't
Mm.
quite know how, right? Because you felt like you didn't have the skills, you didn't, it wasn't lined up. So you were going to go make that happen, but you didn't quite know how at the outset, but you were going to use that as your guiding principle, right? So already from day one, you might be actually quite different from a lot of your other classmates because they may have less of an idea or they may have different weightings on what they value. So it might be about the
Mm.
money and about the prestige. Like there are certainly career
Absolutely.
paths that
Yeah.
offer that, but then they don't offer a lot of the passion, for example.
Yeah.
Your weighting on passion sounds much higher in some, at least
Yeah.
at the outset, right? And then what
Yeah.
often happens is your classmates will find out later that's like, oh man, this actually doesn't feel as great as I thought, and it'll have a lot to do with the fact that they didn't weight it that much.
Yeah.
So, so telling it like a story, you're going through this, and at each point, it's almost like you're being tempted in different ways because the environment isn't exactly geared for exactly what you want. In other words, the values don't always align. And you're shaking your head. So we agree on this. And so, which means that you are being given temptations, or we can call them distractions along the way, or different messaging, which you're implicitly encouraged to adopt. And it sounds like you never did. Like you were able to resist at mostly every point.
Yeah. I think that on the first point where it's like different people's things, like for example, some people have completely different financial situations than I do, right? Some people would have been working full-time jobs during school that I only had a part-time, right? So the money, like that pressure that I was blessed to not have to have as much of because of my fortune of my family and the background that I have, that's different. So to speak on some pedestal of, oh, I had some clairvoyant way of thinking, it's like my pressures or my social impact was very different than perhaps people that the money is very important. So I want to definitely talk on that side. But then the side of like the temptation side, I think it comes from that. It's like I also think that I did well and was more willing to put in the extra work and learn more when I found like the work that was being done was something I enjoyed doing or enjoyed learning of. Because like when it comes to the family business thing and being specific, is you have the ability to learn all aspects of working in a business. It doesn't have the giga workforce that a big corporate does, but you're able to be highly generalized and be able to work on a lot of different things, driving and ultimately the success of a small business. And I loved that. I loved having multiple hats. I loved learning about all portions of a business. And that feeling of as soon as it could be taken away from me by specializing in some perspective, this is personal, I would turn away from. Right. I would never want to specialize as early in my career as I was initially doing it. So that led me to constantly learning massive amounts of information that were very general that I think has been very useful now, because when I was working in those other small businesses, it was not only engineering work, but it was accounting, business casing, sales, all that kind of stuff I was kind of doing in some way. So I would always lean into that. And compared to my peers, where it's like, again, it would be a financial thing. Some people love this very specialized thing. They love to learn very nuanced things. That's just not how my brain worked. I love to learn a lot, be involved in a lot. And then again, the financial thing, I was blessed to be able to kind of go towards that other goal.
Yeah. And Will, at what point did it become clear that Cyder or something that looked very much like it was going to be the answer for you in this journey, right? I'm thinking about young Will all the way to now.
Yeah. Honestly, probably like, I know this sounds insane. Day one at my first job. Like I know that sounds insane. I know it sounds insane, but it's like I remember being there, being like, I seen the small business and be like, I want this. I want this one day. I need to learn. You know what I mean? Like it was one of those things. So always.
Okay. No, I mean, that's a cool story. So here's what I love about your story. On some level, it is actually very intentional. It has to be. If on day one, you maybe you knew it'd be called Cyder, maybe you didn't, but you already
Yeah,
had.
no.
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna assume no, right? All right, that's a little bit too much foresight,
Yeah,
but you did have a vision of some kind. You were just trying to figure out the details, kind of the whole time, right?
yeah,
And you didn't waver on that. Now, certainly, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind later if you discover, well, that's not really what I thought it would be, or any of that kind of stuff. But you, if anything, you were very goal oriented with it, and you were basically trying to figure out, how do I get to a point where that actually can become real? And it's not a short journey that you necessarily took, right? It certainly took a certain number of years, but you had it intentional. It was intentional and unintentional at the same time, right? Because you wouldn't have exactly known, because there's no, like, I take these 8 classes and of course I'm going to be able to get this job, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And that's what I love about your story. And I think that's, in principle, that is everyone who has, let's call them bigger visions, like I want to go build something, right? I want to do X, Y, Z. I was thinking about, this reminds me actually of, do you know the founder of Rivian, the car
I know
company?
this company. I don't know the story.
Yeah, I was watching an interview of him when he went back to his undergrad. So he's an engineering undergrad, and he's telling the story, like he wanted to start a car company basically since I think high school, right? He had this in mind. And just rationally, if you think about, I want to go start a car company, it's a crazy idea, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
There are many things that would make that probably not feasible, and more than that, actually not a great idea. And it's basically, his story is one of just plowing through obstacle after obstacle. And then even now, I think there are still big questions about Rivian and what its future will be, right? And certainly before, I don't know if you know much about the news with Rivian, but before Volkswagen came along to give them essentially, $6.5 billion or whatever it is, there were existential questions about whether they'd make it, 3 or 4 more quarters. So, but that didn't seem to deter him at all, right? Or the people there. And now I see these cars on the road, and I think we will see those around, right, for the foreseeable
Yeah.
future. So, but at 16, he couldn't possibly have known any of the stuff that he was going to run into,
No.
I think, right? But that's what's so cool about it is, but the intention was still there, and it was just a matter of filling in all the things you would need to do to get it done and being willing to kind of go through that. And so it's that mix of intentional and unintentional at the same time that makes these stories actually, I think, so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Which It's not to kind of say anything negative about some other career paths, but for example, if you want to become a lawyer or a doctor, the story isn't as unclear, right? Like we
You have to
we
know you have to specialize early. That's the thing.
it,
Yeah.
and you have a very good sense of by this age and at this time, I'll be gunning for these firms and doing this kind of like there's a very clear structure
Yeah.
that we all know, right, in advance. And so that's a very different, as a compare and contrast, right, as a way to kind of do this. And that's what I love about journeys like yours and hearing about them, because I think most of your classmates, many of them, you had the benefit of growing up in a household where I think implicitly, but I'll phrase this really as a question once I'm done saying the statement. You were given the idea from an early age that you had a very wide open set of opportunities you could pursue, right? Even if you had no idea what they were, but just that basic idea that
Yeah.
there's really a whole lot of things I can do. I think many of your classmates, particularly when you show up in a place like Ivy or any other business school, what you really see is a much more limited menu.
Yeah.
And you're told basically, okay, compete for these, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with these. This is you. This is what
Yeah.
smart students do, or people who like to think highly of themselves, and therefore you should want this too. And what I see time and time again with those students after graduation is that they get to a point where, okay, I'm not super happy. I'm making, reasonably good money. I'm starting to get identified as this, right? So it's getting harder to move, and I don't really know what to do.
Yeah.
And Will, you just bypass this entirely. Like you didn't even, get
Yeah.
into that rut.
It's actually interesting because it's comes down to a line that my family would say where when it's early and you're not 100% sure, it's keeping your options as open as possible, right? And that was and that's just through like in luck, upbringing, gut feeling, all that kind of stuff. There's no template to it. I wish there was, but like for example, engineering kept my options very open. It's a very open. You can do a lot with that degree, right? I then made sure that I kept my options open with the specific to the business world. Like it wasn't like I specified into finance or accounting or anything like that. I got my hands in a lot of different things. Ivy gave a very general education. That's what they do. And then from that as well, the job was very general. And it was like always kind of keeping it open. So to bypass in a way, I unintentionally again was able to keep a lot the guardrails very wide that kept me able to kind of be able to grow a lot of different skill sets that in this position that I do now are very, very helpful. Um, I'm just getting buzzed. I have to actually drop, it seems. But
Sure.
yeah, apologies. So it was one of those, that's what kept it open. And it was difficult because, again, or not difficult, I'm getting buzzed. I'm so sorry.
It's
Um,
okay. I'll tell you what, why don't we stop here? We'll pick up again at another time.